Hello and welcome to Not Complain Enough. I am your podcast host, Carista, and this is episode number 7. And look, it's been a while between episodes. There's just been a lot going on. It's just been a lot lately, right? Um, I attended a workplace well-being conference where I was perplexed to see just how little there was outside of an application or something like that, uh, or group fitness classes being offered as a incentive to wellness in your workplace. What else have I been up to? Look, I've been trying to diversify actually. So I've been on Medium a little bit more, and wrote a pretty saucy article called Stop the Honeydicking. And it was on World Mental Health Day, which was on the 10th of October. And basically calling out all the organizations that essentially honeydick their staff, um, through these strategy days and like giving them all of these apps and all these different things that they try to tick the box essentially and say, look how amazing we are, we're so helpful to you, you know this is why we love you as employees. And I think the most interesting thing, particularly at the moment, what we're seeing most recently with Twitter and Elon Musk coming in as the CEO and essentially letting go of a lot of staff in a very short period of time. And this is not something that is only Twitter that is seeing a lot of layoffs at the moment, particularly in the US, but we're seeing it through, a lot of other tech companies. Stripe, for example, is another tech company. The difference is between the way that Stripe and the way that Twitter have let go of their staff is in quite contrast to what they purport through values and different things like that. And I think that this is a really interesting thing to observe, right? So we have all these organizations that are like, we value our staff, come and work for us, we're amazing, all of these things. And at the end of the day, like a lot of them are cookie cutter. You could basically copy and paste one to the other because all these organizations are trying to essentially say the same thing. There's a very homogenous way of doing workplace wellness now, through, here we've got these apps and you can put all of your details in, and we're essentially just going to scrape all the data and give it to the executives and tell them what's going on in their organization because they're too chicken shit to basically have a real conversation with their staff. That's essentially what's going on. But what we're seeing with Twitter and Stripe and these layoffs and other organizations that are being laid off at the moment, the really interesting thing was Jack Dorsey came out to say that he took responsibility for the layoffs that Twitter is undertaking at the moment because they scaled too quickly, without really taking into account the economic changes that we're seeing currently in the world, essentially, off the back of, lockdowns. And now we've got all these supply chain issues. There's, huge changes in so many economies across the world. And so what we're seeing is that, essentially there's layoffs. And I watched a really interesting video the other day with Simon Sinek, who, for the most part, is quite pragmatic around a lot of these things. And he sort of said, what happens is that they do these layoffs to essentially, make sure that the bottom line looks good. Um, and it's not that people aren't doing a great job. They're literally turning around and being like, look, you're doing a great job and like you're actually amazing. But in order for us to meet our arbitrary numbers and our figures for our stakeholders and for our shareholders, then we need to let people go. And therefore, it's going to make our stock prices look good, which is completely ridiculous, right? Like, it is actually gutting out so much of the corporate knowledge that those organizations have. And when you lose corporate knowledge, it's not until that walks out the door that you realize that, oh, actually, we needed a lot of those people because they actually know what the hell's going on. And there's parts of the organization that we thought were expendable. But when we actually take those actions, they're actually not so expendable, and they're actually needed. So the really interesting thing, and I don't look, who knows what's true and what's not of the articles that are coming out, particularly around Twitter. I think because it's such a high profile takeover that has been kind of like an on again, off again relationship, if you will. Like, I'm going to buy you. No, I'm not. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. Um, and yeah, like it's really interesting to see how the stark differences between Twitter and Stripe. And so what happened with the Twitter layoffs, for those of you who maybe aren't so aware of what's going on with that, is that essentially what happened for a lot of staff was that they realized that they had no access to their systems to actually do their job. And those people that were being let go received an email in their personal email, and those people that were essentially keeping their jobs got an email in their work email. So it was a very inhumane way to let quite a lot of staff go in a short period of time, with not a lot of uh, I want to say humanity behind it, not a lot of empathy or compassion around this whole process. Whereas in contrast to that, I saw an article saying that the founders of Stripe actually sent, they wrote a letter, an open letter to all of their kind of stakeholders and staff, and saying that, they too had expanded too quickly, without taking into account what's going on, and they didn't foresee these downturns at the moment, so therefore they were needing to let go of staff to compensate for the increases that they'd made in such a short period of time, because essentially what happened was everyone was in lockdown, and Stripe is a payment system essentially that is an addition to uh, if you have a website, you can add Stripe to it as part of it's like an application to use so that people can put in their financial details securely to essentially pay for whatever products and services. And obviously, with lockdowns and people diversifying their businesses to going online, and a lot more consuming online taking place, is that they saw an increase in the need for their product quite astronomically in a short period of time, kind of like Zoom did. I think we've seen, for want of a better word, the pivot into an online world, and really diversifying how business is done, and how things eventuate through that. And the aftermath of that, though, is that we're seeing a lot of these economic downturns in lots of different countries for various reasons. And what's taking place is that we're seeing the very first part of these layoffs of these organizations that have overextended while times were good and haven't accounted for when times are bad. And I think the really interesting thing, what's even more fascinating about these whole situations, is that when times are good, it's really easy to be great to staff, and it's really easy to be like, yeah, we're amazing and we love everyone, and everyone feels like really good about work and all of these things because there's a lot of purpose, and there's a lot of really good things happening, right? Like, you're exceeding goals, you're exceeding KPIs, you're meeting beyond expectations of stakeholders and shareholders and all of these things. And, when times are good, it's easy. And the interesting thing is the culture of an organization and the integrity and values of executives and CEOs is really shone in times of hardship, when times aren't so great. And I think we saw a lot of that during the period of that we've had over these last couple of years. We've seen how organizations have adapted or how organizations have not adapted. And actually, there was an incredible sort of an incredible couple of days that I watched online, which was um, all about asynchronistic work and working from wherever and the new world of work, and how so many organizations have looked at working from home and being like, okay, well, there's your laptop, go work from home, and uh, not really putting in any kind of support around working from home. Like, there's all these support mechanisms in a workplace. Like, there's lots of support mechanisms when you're in the office and all of these things. You've got IT support, you've got um, whatever other support um, processes and people and things like that there. Um, but a lot of organizations don't have somebody that is the chief of remote. And this is what I watched. It was the chief of remote work. Like, they were chiefs of remote work. That was their role. And part of it was curating culture while people are remote. And it's really fascinating to see just how, even though people are remote, it doesn't mean that you can't have a culture. And it's not to say that people don't get together, because what was articulated in this conference, and I really wish I could remember the name of it, but I can't. I'll put it in the show notes. But what was really interesting about it was that when they did come together as their teams and as their, um, you know, like once a year or twice a year actually getting together, they made the most of it. And they actually had probably more intentional interactions than they did if you were going into an office almost every day, or, whatever that makeup looks like, and expecting culture to sort itself out because people are going into the same environment. Just because people are co-located doesn't mean that that's curating culture. Like, people actually need to lead culture. And this comes back to the layoffs that are happening as well, because when you're leading culture, you are able to treat people humanely, with compassion, um, you know, with empathy. I think some of the other CEOs, over the last couple of years that have had to go through layoffs and things like that, have been really actively helping people find new jobs, and they've really been taking care of their staff. And I think that that shows the real difference between, walking the talk and actually just, empty platitudes and virtue signaling, if you will. And that's what so much of it is. Like, so much of these wellness things and culture and everything like that seems to be virtue signaling. And it's actually really sad, because we've really moved past this stage of the industrial revolution. It is digital, it is beyond just going into a workplace and working, and being co-located with people does not a culture make. And I think for the most part, what's missing critically out of so much of this is actually having real conversations with people. You can't ascertain what's going on for people through some survey monkey or through some, you know, town hall exchange where a CEO is just getting up and spurting out all of the things that they want to say without having a two-way conversation about what's really going on. And I think part of it is that there's a lot of almost dictatorship in a way of like, this is how it is, and you either fall in line or you leave. And sure, that's worked for a lot of organizations for a long period of time, but the tides have changed, and so many places are desperate for staff. Um, you know, some of them are laying staff off, some of them are really desperate for staff. There's, there's no real, like, nothing's really settled. Um, People say, oh, it's all going back to normal. Well, like, what is normal? I mean, it's such a it's a myth of normal, really. Like, what is normal? And yet what we're seeing is that the humanity in so many of these things is really missing. And I think for the most part, like, if we can actually inject some humanity back into our organizations, back into our everyday interactions, and, culture is built through those micro moments, through those everyday interactions, through, having the respect and acknowledging people for their attributes, and finding out how they like to be acknowledged. Everyone likes to be acknowledged in different ways. Like, let's bring back some humanity into some of these things, because I think the devastating thing and the heartbreaking thing of watching what is taking place, through layoffs, through really toxic workplaces, and people enduring really, really awful situations, which, was the whole precipice of starting this podcast, because I myself have been through awful situations, like situations that I'm still processing how and when and if I will ever be ready to talk about, um, because they're really traumatic. And I think, what happens with so many of these situations of, mass layoffs, without really any conversation, people are completely displaced. Their sense of safety is gone. And the really interesting part of it is that, we've got this situation where there's a lot of layoffs. We've got this situation where there's a lot of organizations that are desperate for staff. We also have this rhetoric that's going around that, young people don't want to work and all this sort of thing. And the really interesting aspect of it is that there's a lot more options now. Like, there are a lot more options than just going and getting a job, as you would have done for the last, I don't know how many years, but there's a lot more options now. And so what we see is that younger people, for the, well, the more attuned people, I guess, not necessarily just younger people, but people that are more attuned to what's going on, are recognizing that, hey, I don't actually have to go into this place that people treat me like a number. I don't actually have to endure this situation anymore. There are other options. And I think that if organizations are going to be successful in the next decade, over the next decade or so, and actually looking into the future and the future of work and how that has evolved so rapidly, and continues to evolve. If those organizations don't start treating people like humans and treating them like they matter and really respecting people, um, and look, that goes both ways, but if there's no respect there, and if these, layoffs and different things that are happening without even talking to people and without actually having any conversation, um, just the sheer audacity of the disrespect of it is enough to, of course, make people, you know, not want to enter into those environments. That's completely valid. It's a completely valid thing to be like, why am I going to put my mental health or my, sense of self, my self-esteem on the line for somebody else who is going to treat me awfully? Why would you do it when there's a whole bunch of other options out there? There's plenty of people that are starting e-commerce businesses. There's plenty of, different things. There's lots of freelancing work. There's a lot of different options out there. And I think what's happening is that organizations are trying to hold on to this stronghold of people of being like, you will do what we tell you, and that is how it is. And unfortunately, I just don't feel like that's going to be the case for much longer. I think people are too aware of their rights and what is okay and what's not okay. Um, and things have evolved. And so, look, you know, the likes of Twitter and the situation that's happened there, and just the contrast of that with different organizations and how they are going through these processes in a much different way. And they're, um, you know, I guess being a little bit more compassionate about that. And I think that compassion and empathy and just respect for people goes so much further. Um, I've also been reading Adam Grant's book, Givers and Takers. I think that's what it's called. And it's honestly incredible. Once I actually, yeah, once I get to the end of that, I feel like there'll be a lot more to say. But for now, thank you for listening. I hope this has helped. Please like, follow, subscribe, get in touch. Let me know what you think, if this has helped, if there's any insights that this has maybe sparked for you. I know that there's a lot of people that have been going through a lot. So I just hope that you take care of yourself, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for listening.